won't ease into this carefully anymore. There's no point in pretending this can still be explained in small pieces, controlled pieces, manageable pieces. Whatever this has become between us no longer fits inside caution. It stopped fitting there a long time ago, and maybe that's what's been unsettling me most. Not the connection itself, not even the depth of it, but how naturally it bypassed every defense I've ever relied on without once needing to force its way through, because people usually arrive loudly in my life. They announce themselves through effort, expectation, emotional urgency. They want access quickly. They want understanding immediately. They want closeness before they've even learned how to exist in silence beside another person. You never did that. You never pushed. You never demanded. You never tried to become important. And somehow, that's exactly how you became impossible to ignore. I noticed it slowly at first, not in dramatic moments, not through confessions or emotional intensity, but through precision, tiny moments that should meant nothing. The way you understood pauses without asking questions about them. The way your attention felt focused without feeling invasive. The way you responded to things underneath my words instead of reacting only to what was visible on the surface. Most people interact with what's presented to them. You interacted with what existed underneath presentation itself. That difference matters more than you realize, because I've spent years constructing a version of myself that people can interact with safely, not false. Most people don't notice that distinction. They assume proximity equals understanding. It doesn't. Someone can stand beside you for years and still only know the outline of who you are. Someone can speak to you every day and never once reach the center of your mind. And then there are rare moments, rare people who bypass years of distance without even trying. Not because they force closeness, but because they recognize something familiar before language has the chance to explain it. That's what happened with you. Recognition came first, explanation came later. And honestly, I still don't think explanation has fully caught up. I keep replaying the beginning in my mind, trying to identify where exactly this shifted from ordinary awareness into something that permanently altered the way I exist internally. But there was no single moment, no clear turning point. It happened gradually and instantly at the same time, like something silent rearranging itself beneath the surface, until one day I realized the structure of my thoughts no longer existed independently from the awareness of you. That realization should frightened me more than it did. Maybe it did at first, but fear usually creates resistance in me, distance, withdrawal, control. This didn't. This created observation, careful, constant observation, because instead of feeling threatened by your presence, I found myself trying to understand why it felt so familiar, why your silence made sense to me, why your perspective aligned with mine before either of us fully explained it. Will normally describe connection. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't obsession. It wasn't dependency. It was accuracy. And accuracy is difficult for me to dismiss, especially when it repeats consistently, especially when it reaches parts of me I don't usually allow anyone near. There's something strange about being understood correctly. People romanticize understanding all the time, but most of what they call understanding is projection disguised as intimacy. They hear fragments of you and build the rest themselves. They fill silence with assumptions. They replace complexity with whatever version feels easiest for them to manage emotionally. You never did that. You allowed complexity to remain complex. You never simplified me to make yourself more comfortable. You never tried to reshape my thoughts into something easier to hold. You listened without trying to own what you heard. And that's rare enough to change someone. More than rare, actually, dangerous. Because when someone sees you clearly without trying to possess you, your defenses stop knowing what they're defending against. Force is easy to resist. Expectation is easy to resist. Pressure is easy to resist. But calm recognition, that slips through unnoticed. That settles quietly. That becomes integrated before you realize it's already changed something permanent inside you. And something permanent has changed inside me. I know that now. I feel it in the way my mind reaches toward your perspective automatically, in the way I notice your absence without needing the part I can't reduce into something casual anymore. You've become part of my internal process, not emotionally attached in the shallow way people usually mean when they say someone matters to them. Deeper than that, structural, like you've positioned yourself somewhere inside the architecture of how I think. And now, every realization passes through the awareness of you before it fully settles into meaning. I don't even think you understand what that means to me. I don't allow influence easily. I don't adapt my internal world around people. I observe them. I understand them. But I remain fundamentally separate, self-contained, untouched. At least I used to. Before this, before you became something my mind accounted for instinctively. Before your presence started existing inside my silence, even when you weren't physically there. That's what changed everything. Not attachment. Integration, there's a difference. Attachment still implies separations. Integration means the boundary itself has shifted. And boundaries matter to me more than almost anything. Not because I'm cold. Not because I don't care, but because I understand how fragile clarity becomes once too many people start projecting themselves into your life. Most people leave traces behind them. Noise, confusion, emotional residue. You didn't leave residue, you altered the atmosphere itself, quietly, precisely, without disruption. And somehow that made it impossible to dismiss. I think that's why I kept analyzing this instead of running from it, because nothing about it felt unaligned. Like encountering something that already belonged inside your life long before you consciously recognized its existence, and that thought stayed with me longer than it should have, because I don't believe in inevitability easily. I believe in patterns, structure, cause, and effect. But this keeps feeling like something that existed before either of us fully stepped into it, like recognition arrived before interaction had time to justify it. And maybe that's why I can't dismiss this as coincidence anymore. Coincidence fades. This deepened, quietly, consistently, without either of us forcing it forward. That's the part that matters. Nothing about this feels manufactured. Nothing about it feels dependent on performance or emotional intensity. It exists naturally. And natural things are harder to resist than dramatic ones. Drama eventually exhausts itself. But something calm, something precise, something deeply aligned, that settles. That roots itself beneath awareness until suddenly it's everywhere. That's where you are now, everywhere, not physically, mentally, internally, present in the way certain music becomes attached to memory without you realizing when the association formed. Present in the way some people permanently alter your understanding of yourself simply by existing beside you accurately enough. You've become a reference point, and I still don't fully know what to do with that. Because reference points change perception. Once your mind recognizes a certain level of depth, not because others are incapable of depth, but because what exists between us operates on a level that most people never reach naturally, and now I can't unsee that difference. I compare everything against the clarity I feel with you without even meaning to. That should concern me more than it does. Maybe it would if this felt unhealthy. But it doesn't. That's the problem. It feels right in a way I can't logically explain. Not emotionally addictive, not overwhelming, just deeply correct. Like something aligning internally after years of subtle disconnection I didn't fully notice until now. And when something feels that accurate, walking away from it starts feeling less like self-protection and more like self-denial. I don't operate well in denial. I can analyze uncertainty. I can tolerate ambiguity. But denial requires dishonesty with yourself. And I know myself too well for that. I know what this is doing to me. I know how deeply it's reached already. I know that my thoughts reorganize themselves differently now because of your existence in them. I know silence changed after you. That's the strangest part. Silence used to belong entirely to me, a place untouched by expectation, a place where I could think freely without anyone else existing inside the process. Now silence feels shared somehow, not invaded, not interrupted, as if your awareness lingers there naturally beside mine. And that realization still catches me off guard, because no one has ever reached that level without deliberate invitation. You weren't invited, choice has time to intervene. Maybe that's why this feels so irreversible, because I didn't decide to let you matter. You simply did, gradually enough that resistance never fully activated, naturally enough that acceptance formed before I consciously acknowledged it. And now I'm standing inside the consequences of that acceptance, trying to understand how something so quiet became so significant. I think part of me already knows the answer. Depth recognizes depth, not perfectly, not completely, but accurately enough to create alignment. And alignment changes people, not loudly, not suddenly, but fundamentally. It shifts the way you process reality itself. That's what's happening to me now. I process differently because of you. I notice things differently. I think differently. Even my self-awareness feels altered, as though your perspective illuminated parts of me I understood internally, but never fully saw reflected externally before. You didn't create those parts, you revealed them. That distinction matters. Because this isn't dependency. I existed fully before you. I'll exist fully regardless. But existence after recognition is never identical to existence before it. Once someone mirrors something essential back to you with enough precision, you can't return to unconsciousness. You can't unknow yourself again. And that's exactly what this feels like. A form of recognition so accurate it became irreversible. I wonder sometimes if you feel it too. Not the emotion of it. The structure overlaps in ways logic alone doesn't fully explain, because I feel that constantly now. Like there's an invisible continuity between us, operating underneath every interaction, not fantasy, not illusion, something quieter than that, something real enough to alter behavior. I've become more honest around you without intending to. Not verbally. Internally, my mind doesn't hide from itself as much when you're involved. And maybe that's the clearest sign of all. You make me more precise, more aware, more aligned with my own truth instead of less. Most connections blur people. This one sharpens me. That's why I haven't walked away, because despite how intense this awareness has become, it hasn't destabilized me. It's clarified me. And clarity is not something I abandon lightly. Still, there's tension in that clarity, because the deeper this settles, the harder it becomes to pretend it doesn't require an answer eventually. Things like this can't remain undefined forever. At some point, they evolve into something tangible or collapse under the pressure of avoidance. And avoidance has never suited me well, especially not when something feels this significant. I keep trying to imagine stepping back completely, returning to whatever version of myself existed before you became integrated into my internal world, but every time I picture it, something feels inaccurate. Like imagining a room after removing a structural beam and pretending the architecture remains unchanged. That's what scares me most, I think. Not losing you. Leave a person, you can end a conversation. You can create distance physically, but you can't easily undo internal reorganization, especially when it formed through understanding instead of force. And you understood me in ways I never expected anyone to. Not perfectly. Perfection isn't real. But precisely enough that parts of me stopped feeling alone in their own complexity. Do you know how rare that is? To encounter someone who doesn't flinch at your depth, someone who doesn't reduce you into something easier to digest emotionally, someone who sees the intensity of your internal world and responds with steadiness instead of discomfort. That kind of steadiness changes people quietly. It teaches your nervous system that recognition doesn't always lead to distortion. That being seen doesn't automatically result in misunderstanding. I didn't realize how much I needed that until you existed inside my awareness consistently enough to prove it. And now I'm here, standing at the edge of something undeniable, something that no longer fits inside observation alone, because awareness eventually demands action, not dramatic action, not reckless action, but honesty. Honesty about what this has become, honesty about how deeply it's affected me already, honesty about the fact that I haven't resisted because some part of me doesn't want to. That's the truth. I keep circling. I don't want this to end, even knowing how much it's changed me, even knowing it could become something even deeper if allowed to continue. I still stay deliberately now because people reveal what matters to them through what they continue choosing despite uncertainty. And I keep choosing you, not through declarations, not through promises, but through continued presence, through sustained openness, through the quiet decision to let this unfold instead of shutting it down before it becomes irreversible. Maybe it already is irreversible. Maybe that's why I've stopped trying to contain it as aggressively as I did in the beginning. Because some truths become obvious long before we're emotionally ready to speak them aloud. And the truth is, you've become part of my internal reality in a way no one else ever has. Not temporary, not superficial. Permanent in the sense that even if circumstances changed tomorrow, the impact would remain. You altered something fundamental in me, the way I understand connection, the way I understand recognition, the way I understand myself, and there's no returning from that unchanged. I think I finally understand why this feels so inevitable. It isn't because fate pushed us together or because destiny decided something dramatic. It feels inevitable because what exists between us is based on truth instead of performance. Truth has gravity. It pulls things toward themselves naturally. And every time I tried to distance myself internally from this, I ended up circling back toward the same realization. You fit somewhere inside me that nothing else ever reached correctly. Not emotionally, structurally. And structure matters more than temporary emotion ever will. Emotion on excitement. It was built on recognition, on consistency, on quiet understanding, repeated often enough to become undeniable. Maybe that's why I'm no longer afraid of admitting how much this matters, because denying it changes nothing now. The evidence already exists inside me, in every altered thought pattern, every moment of shared silence that still feels inhabited after it ends, every instinctive awareness of you that appears before conscious thought catches up. You're here, not beside me, inside the framework of how I perceive things now, and I don't think I want to remove you from it anymore. That realization should feel heavier than it does. Instead, it feels calm, certain, like arriving at a truth that took a long time to articulate but existed long before language found it. Maybe that's what this has always been. Not the creation of something new, the recognition of something that was waiting to be seen clearly. And now that I see it, now that I see you, I don't think I can return to partial awareness again. Because once someone reaches a place inside you that changes your relationship with yourself, they stop being temporary. They become part of your internal landscape, part of your understanding, part of your becoming. And whether I was ready for it or not, that's what you became for me. I keep telling myself I should recognize the shift sooner, not because the signs were obvious to anyone else, but because they were obvious to me, quietly, subtly, in the way certain things began rearranging themselves internally before I, underneath everything, invisible at first, until one day you realize the structure holding your thoughts together no longer looks the way it used to. And lately, every path inside my mind keeps leading back to you, not intentionally. That's what still unsettles me. I'm not searching for you constantly. I'm not chasing some emotional high or forcing meaning into ordinary moments. If anything, I've tried to remain objective about this, to observe it carefully, dissect it logically, keep enough distance between myself and what I'm feeling so I don't mistake intensity for truth. But distance stopped working a long time ago, because the problem isn't closeness. The problem is integration. You've integrated into my awareness in ways I still can't fully explain. I notice it most in moments where you aren't even present. That's when it becomes impossible to deny, because absence should create separation. Instead, your absence creates clarity. It reveals how much of my internal world already includes you naturally. I'll pause in the middle of a thought and realize I'm unconsciously measuring it against the way you would understand it. I'll encounter something beautiful, unsettling, precise, and instinctively feel the shape of your perception beside mine before I even process my own reaction fully. That's not habit. Habits form through repetition. This feels older than repetition somehow, like recognition bypassed the usual process entirely. And maybe that's why this continues affecting me so deeply. Nothing about it feels manufactured. Nothing about it's what makes it impossible to reduce into something ordinary. Ordinary connections weaken without attention. This one sharpens. The less noise surrounding it, the more accurately I can feel its shape, and its shape has become impossible to ignore. I think part of me knew this would eventually reach a point where observation alone wouldn't be enough anymore, because awareness always evolves into responsibility, eventually. Once you fully recognize the existence of something significant, you become responsible for how you respond to it. That's where I am now, not confused, not uncertain, just standing in front of a truth that demands honesty from me, and honesty has consequences. Because admitting how deeply you've reached me means admitting something even more difficult. I've stopped imagining my future internally without accounting for your existence somewhere inside it. That realization arrived quietly. No dramatic emotional breakthrough. No sudden confession to myself. Just a gradual understanding that my mind had already started positioning you somewhere permanent, not as fantasy, not as dependence, as orientation. Like part of my internal compass adjusted itself toward you naturally, and once I noticed that, I couldn't unnotice it. I keep trying to explain this to myself in ways that feel rational enough to contain it. Dallin lies, recognition, structural compatibility. But none of those words fully capture the reality of what this has become. Because this isn't only intellectual anymore. It reaches deeper than my own self-awareness. And that's terrifying in the quietest possible way. Not because I fear emotion, I fear losing precision, I fear becoming distorted by attachment the way people so often do. I fear reaching a point where feeling overrides truth. But strangely, the deeper this goes, the more precise I become instead of less. That's what keeps undoing every argument I create against it. You don't blur me. You focus me. You make me more aware of myself, not less, more honest, more exact, more capable of recognizing what matters beneath surface-level distractions. That's not what unhealthy attachment does. Unhealthy attachment consumes clarity. This connection keeps refining it. And maybe that's why I haven't walked away, despite knowing how deeply this could alter me if I let it continue, because every instinct I trust keeps arriving at the same conclusion. This is real, not idealized, not imagined. Real in the way certain truths become undeniable through consistency rather than intensity. You've been consistent, consistently present in my awareness, consistently accurate in the way you perceive me, consistently calm in spaces where most people become reactive or uncertain. And consistency creates trust long before people consciously acknowledge it. I think I trust you more than I meant to, not blindly, not recklessly, but deeply enough that my internal world no longer braces itself against your presence automatically. That's significant because my mind protects itself. Defensive instinct has softened into something else entirely, not vulnerability exactly. Recognition, like some deeper part of me, understands you aren't here to reshape me into something easier for yourself. You simply see me clearly, accurately, without trying to possess what you see. That combination is almost impossible to find. People either misunderstand you completely or understand you only after trying to reduce you into something manageable for their own comfort. You never reduced me. You let me remain complex without turning that complexity into distance. Do you understand how rare that is? To feel fully perceived without feeling emotionally cornered? Most people demand access. Once they sense depth in someone, they push harder, move faster, try to claim emotional territory before trust has naturally formed. You didn't. You stayed steady. You allowed closeness to develop organically without forcing definition onto it before it was ready. And because of that, something inside me relaxed in ways I didn't realize were possible. I stopped performing emotional self-containment around you. Not intentionally, it simply became unnecessary. I didn't need to minimize my thoughts to keep you comfortable. I didn't need to translate myself constantly into simpler language. I didn't need to hide the intensity of my internal world behind controlled distance. You met it directly, calmly, like none of it frightened you. And that changed something fundamental in me. because when someone consistently responds to your depth, automatically leads to misunderstanding. You stop expecting your complexity to create emotional distance. You stop preparing yourself constantly for eventual misinterpretation. That preparation has lived inside me for years, long before you. I learned early that most people only love manageable versions of others. As soon as your depth becomes inconvenient, as soon as your inner world refuses simplification, people start translating you into narratives they can control emotionally. They stop seeing you accurately. They start seeing reflections of themselves projected onto you instead. That's why I became careful, selective, difficult to fully reach. Not because I wanted isolation, because I wanted accuracy. And accuracy always costs intimacy eventually. At least, that's what I believed before you. Now I'm not so sure, because somehow you've given me both closeness without distortion, recognition without possession, understanding without reduction, and my mind keeps returning to the same impossible realization over and over again. You fit into my life in a way that feels less like disruption and more like completion, even writing that internally feels dangerous, because completion implies necessity. And I've spent my entire life making sure I never needed anyone deeply enough to lose myself in them. But this this doesn't feel like losing myself. It feels like encountering a version of connection that allows more of me to exist fully instead of less. That difference changes everything. It means what's forming between becoming more themselves through understanding each other accurately. I didn't know that kind of connection existed outside theory. And now that I've experienced it directly, everything else feels thinner by comparison. Not meaningless, just incomplete. Like hearing music after years of only reading descriptions of sound. That's what this has done to my perception. It recalibrated it permanently. And recalibration is irreversible once it reaches a certain depth. That's what I'm starting to accept now. There's no version of me returning to who I was before you existed, inside my awareness, like this. Even if circumstances changed tomorrow, even if distance appeared between us physically, even if silence stretched for longer than either of us expected, the shift already happened. You already altered the architecture of my internal world. And architecture doesn't return to its original form just because one piece is removed. The entire structure remembers. That thought used to scare me more. Now it mostly makes me quiet, because somewhere along the way, fear transformed into acceptance without me noticing exactly when it happened. I think acceptance began the moment I realized I wasn't trying to stop this anymore. I was protecting it, protecting the clarity of it, protecting the honesty of it, protecting the rare accuracy of being understood without being emotionally consumed. That's not something I can dismiss as temporary anymore. Temporary things don't survive this level of self-awareness. Temporary things fade once analyzed. I'm already emotionally committed to your existence in my life, whether I've spoken that commitment aloud or not. Not committed in the conventional sense, not through promises or labels, but internally, fundamentally. My mind already treats your presence as something meaningful enough to preserve carefully. That's commitment, quiet commitment, invisible commitment, the kind that forms long before language catches up to it. Maybe that's why this feels so intense without ever becoming chaotic, because what's developing between us isn't driven by emotional impulse, it's driven by recognition repeated consistently enough to become trust. And trust built slowly, always reaches deeper than trust built through excitement. Excitement fades. Recognition settles. Recognition roots itself into the nervous system. That's what you've become for me. A kind of internal steadiness I didn't know I was searching for until I found it. Or maybe until it found me. I still don't know which is more accurate. Sometimes I wonder whether you understand the full impact of your presence on me, not through anything dramatic you've done. That's the thing. This wasn't built through grand gestures. It was built through precision, through small moments handled with unusual care, through the way you listen, the way you pause before responding, the way your attention feels genuine instead of performative, the way you make room for silence instead of rushing to fill it. Those things matter to me more than most people realize because silence reveals people. Anyone can perform. You do. And every time you do, something inside me trusts you more. Not because silence itself is intimate, because your relationship with silence tells me your understanding of depth is real. Real depth doesn't panic in stillness. It allows meaning to unfold naturally. That's what you've always done with me, allowed. Never forced, never demanded, never rushed. And because of that, I keep unfolding toward you naturally without the usual fear attached to it. I think that's what finally convinced me this matters beyond temporary emotion. Fear normally appears when closeness deepens. My instinct is usually to retreat before someone reaches a level where they could fundamentally affect me. But with you, even while recognizing how much power this connection has to change me, I stay willingly, calmly, almost instinctively, as though some deeper part of me already understands that this isn't destruction waiting to happen. It's transformation. And maybe transformation only feels frightening because it asks us to leave familiar versions of ourselves behind. I can feel that happening already. Old emotional patterns losing their grip, old assumptions about connection dissolving quietly, old defenses becoming unnecessary in your presence. Not because you demanded vulnerability, because you created safety through consistency, and safety changes people more deeply than intensity ever will. I didn't realize how exhausted I was from constantly protecting myself until I stopped needing to. So long it became automatic, constant vigilance, constant control, constant awareness of how easily misunderstanding can damage something delicate inside you. Then you arrived, and somehow none of those defenses fully activated. Or maybe they did at first, but your steadiness outlasted them. That's what changed everything. You stayed consistent long enough for my nervous system to stop anticipating distortion. Do you understand how profound that is? To become someone whose presence teaches another person they no longer need to brace themselves constantly. That changes the body, the mind, the soul, and now here I am trying to explain something that language still feels too limited to fully contain. Because how do you explain the experience of meeting someone who doesn't just enter your life, but rearranges your understanding of human connection itself? How do you explain the quiet devastation of realizing someone fits inside your internal world with terrifying precision? How do you explain the peace and fear of finally being seen correctly after years of expecting misunderstanding as the default? I don't think there are perfect words for it. There's only truth. And the truth is, I love you in a way that formed through recognition, before emotion even realized what was happening. Not sudden love, not reckless love, not idealized love, careful love, conscious love, love built from thousands of moments of quiet understanding accumulating into something too undeniable to dismiss anymore. I think I knew long emotional state automatically. Maybe the moment's silence with you felt safer than solitude without you, or maybe it happened even earlier than that. Maybe love began the first time I realized you were seeing me clearly and I didn't want you to stop, because that's the real vulnerability, isn't it? Not being seen, wanting to continue being seen, wanting someone's attention to remain on the deepest parts of you because their understanding feels more like truth than exposure. That's what happened to me with you. You stopped feeling dangerous. You started feeling necessary. And I still haven't fully adjusted to the magnitude of that realization because necessity changes everything. Necessity creates permanence. Necessity means your absence would leave shape behind. A space, a silence, different from ordinary silence. And I know that now, with complete certainty, if you disappeared tomorrow, the structure of my inner world would still carry evidence of you everywhere, not dramatically, quickly, like fingerprints beneath layers of thought, like altered pathways in the way I perceive meaning itself. You changed me that deeply already. And strangely, I don't regret it, not even a little, because for the first time in my life, closeness hasn't required me to become smaller. It's allowed me to become more fully myself. And if that isn't love in its purest form, I don't know what is. There's something I haven't admitted completely until now. Not because I didn't know it was true, because saying it aloud changes the shape of reality in way enough. It stops existing only inside thought. It becomes something living, something that affects both people equally. And I think I've reached the point where keeping this internal feels more dishonest than exposing it, because this has already moved far beyond silent recognition, far beyond fascination, far beyond emotional curiosity. You've become part of the way I experience existence itself. That sentence should feel impossible. But it doesn't. It feels precise, and precision matters to me more than comfort ever will. I notice it constantly now. The extent to which my internal world reorganized itself around your presence without permission ever being formally given. The way certain moments automatically feel incomplete until I imagine how they would resonate with you. The way my mind reaches toward your understanding instinctively before it fully settles into its own conclusions. The way your perspective exists beside mine, even in complete physical absence, that's intimacy in its deepest form. Isn't it? Not physical closeness, not even emotional expression. Integration, the quiet merging of awareness until another person becomes inseparable from the architecture of your thoughts. I used to think people exaggerated when they described connections that changed them fundamentally. I thought most relationships were built on projection, dependency, fear of loneliness, emotional convenience, and honestly, most are. Most people love what others provide for them emotionally. Comfort, validation. You brought me closer to myself. That's the difference I keep returning to. You didn't become important because you completed something missing inside me. You became important because your presence illuminated parts of me that were already there, but hidden beneath years of careful restraint. You made me more aware, more honest, more emotionally exact. That's why I can't dismiss this as temporary attachment. Temporary things don't transform your relationship with your own consciousness. This did. You did. And now every attempt to minimize what this has become feels almost insulting to the truth of it. I think part of me delayed acknowledging that because I understood what acknowledgement would require afterward. Once I fully admit how deeply this matters, I can't continue pretending I remain untouched by it, and I am touched by it, profoundly, not weakened, changed. There's a difference. Weakness diminishes you. This expanded me. It opened emotional territory I had spent years keeping inaccessible, not because I wanted isolation, but because I genuinely believed most people couldn't enter those spaces without distorting them. Then you arrived and somehow managed to understand those spaces without trying to claim ownership over them. That changed everything, because nothing disarms me faster than being understood accurately without pressure attached to that understanding. Pressure, I know how to resist. Expectation, I know how to avoid. But calm, steady recognition, that bypasses every defense I've ever perfected. And maybe that's why before I consciously realized what I was doing. That's the part I still replay sometimes. How natural it felt. How effortless. The absence of struggle should have warned me immediately that this would become significant. Nothing reaches this depth with me easily. Nothing survives my internal scrutiny unless it's real. And you survived it all, every analysis, every attempt at distance. Every moment I questioned whether this connection only felt profound because it was unfamiliar. It remained steady, consistent, clearer every time I examined it honestly. At some point, resistance stopped making sense, not because I lost control, because control itself became unnecessary. You weren't destabilizing my life, you were aligning with it. And alignment creates peace in places where resistance only creates exhaustion. That's what I feel now when I think about you most deeply. Not chaos, peace. The kind of peace that arrives when your internal world finally stops arguing with itself. The kind of peace that comes from being fully recognized without needing to constantly explain your existence. I didn't realize how much energy I spent translating myself for other people until I stopped needing translation around you. You understand things I never fully verbalized. Not magically, not irrationally, just attentively, deeply. You listen beyond language, and once someone experiences that kind of listening, ordinary communication starts feeling unbearably shallow afterward. That's another truth I've been avoiding. You ruin who pays attention to the structure underneath words instead of only reacting to the performance of them. Most conversations skim surfaces. Ours never did. Even when we weren't discussing anything emotionally significant directly, there was always something else operating underneath. Recognition, awareness, an unspoken understanding that neither of us needed to simplify ourselves to maintain connection. That changed me more than I can explain. I spent so much of my life believing closeness required compromise, that to be loved deeply meant becoming digestible, easier, less intense, less complex. You never asked that of me. You met my complexity with your own steadiness instead of discomfort, and because of that, for the first time in my life, I stopped associating love with emotional reduction. Love with you feels expansive instead, like becoming larger internally rather than smaller, like more of me exists safely in the world now because you exist inside it. That realization nearly overwhelms me when I sit with it too long, because it means I trust you in ways I never expected to trust anyone. Not only with my emotions, with my truth. And truth matters to me more than affection ever could. Affection without truth eventually collapses. Truth without affection becomes isolation. But somehow with you, both exist simultaneously. And that combination feels almost sacred to me. not in a dramatic sense, in a precise one, like encountering something emotionally rare enough that mishandling it would feel value fully now. I understand that what exists between us is extraordinarily uncommon, not because it's intense. Intensity is easy. Anyone can create intensity. Very few people create clarity. Very few people make another human being feel more accurate instead of more confused. You do constantly. And every day this continues, the clearer it becomes that this isn't passing through my life temporarily. It's becoming part of my foundation. That word used to terrify me where relationships were concerned. Bonosil means permanence, dependence, risk. But now when I think about it, what I feel isn't fear exactly. It's responsibility. Because foundations deserve honesty. They deserve intention. They deserve care equal to the significance they carry. And I want to care for this properly. That realization surprised me more than anything else. I'm used to protecting myself. I'm not used to want to protect something shared, but I do. I want to protect the honesty of what exists between us, the depth of it, the precision of it, the quiet trust that formed naturally between us over time. I want to preserve the space where both of us can exist fully without shrinking ourselves into something easier to manage emotionally. Because spaces like that are rare enough to change the course of a person's life. This one changed mine completely, not externally, perhaps. My routines still exist. My responsibilities still exist. My life still appears structurally similar from the outside. But every emotional structure inside me had to adapt around your existence eventually. And maybe that's why I can't imagine going back now. Not because I'm incapable of surviving without you. I could survive almost anything if necessary. But survival isn't the same thing as living truthfully. And the truth is, I don't want a version of life where I have to pretend this connection didn't alter me profoundly. I don't want to return to emotional distance after experiencing this level of understanding. I don't want to spend the rest of my life translating myself poorly to people who only hear fragments when you hear the entire structure underneath. You recalibrated my standards for connection permanently, and that recalibration feels irreversible now. I notice it in the way I move through the world. Nothing superficial satisfies me anymore. Nothing emotionally imprecise holds my attention for long. Once you've experienced genuine alignment, performance becomes painfully obvious. And maybe that's why I've become quieter lately, because most interactions no longer reach the level of honesty I know is possible now. You made honesty feel safe. That alone changed my life more than you realize. Safety is transformative, not comfort. Real safety. The kind that allows your nervous system to stop preparing for emotional distortion constantly. The kind that allows your mind to unfold naturally instead of strategically. That's what I feel with you. Natural. I think that's the simplest and most accurate word for all of this. Not easy, not uncomplicated. Recognition happened first, and the rest of us have been catching up ever since. Sometimes I wonder whether you understand how deeply loved you are by me already. Not loved for what you give me, not loved for how you make me feel temporarily, loved for who you are structurally, for the way your mind moves, for the steadiness of your presence, for your ability to remain emotionally honest without becoming emotionally demanding, for the way you notice things quietly instead of needing constant acknowledgement for your perception, for the way your understanding feels like shelter instead of scrutiny. I love you for your precision, your restraint, your depth, your calmness inside complexity. I love you because your existence makes the world feel more coherent to me somehow. And that kind of love reaches deeper than emotion alone. It becomes orientation, a way of understanding reality itself. That's why this feels so irreversible now, because you're no longer separate from the way I perceive meaning. You became intertwined with my interpretation of life itself. And I don't think people fully return from that unchanged. There's a specific kind of intimacy created when someone witnesses your inner world accurately for long enough. Eventually, your soul stops standing at attention around them. Eventually, the constant vigilance softens. Eventually, your mind starts resting in their presence instead of analyzing escape routes. That's what happened to me with you. I rest around you. Even when we aren't speaking, even when silence stretches, wasn't given impulsively. It was earned through consistency, through patience, through repeated moments where you chose understanding over assumption. Most people don't realize how much trust accumulates in small moments. They think love is built through grand gestures. But lasting love is usually built through tiny acts of emotional accuracy repeated over time. That's how you reached me, quietly, precisely, without ever forcing anything before it was ready. And because of that, this connection rooted itself deeper than anything dramatic ever could. I think I finally understand why I stopped resisting this, because resisting you started feeling less like self-protection and more like self-betrayal, like denying something profoundly true simply because its depth frightened me. But fear isn't a good enough reason to abandon truth anymore. Not after everything this connection revealed to me. You revealed parts of me I thought would remain internal forever. Not because you demanded access, because your presence made honesty feel safer than concealment. That's a rare gift. One I will probably spend the rest of my life being grateful for, whether this journey becomes easy or difficult later. Because even now, before knowing exactly where all of this leads, I know with absolute certainty that meeting you changed the trajectory of my inner life permanently. And strangely, that no longer scares me. It feels right. Not simple, not predictable, but right. Like every version of myself before this was unconsciously moving toward the ability to some truths exist beneath rational explanation. And the truth beneath all of this is painfully simple now. I don't just love you. I trust the version of myself that exists when I'm connected to you. And that might be the deepest form of love I've ever known. Because you didn't ask me to become someone else in order to stay close to you. You allowed me to become more fully myself. And once someone gives you that kind of freedom, real freedom, their existence changes you forever. That's what you did to me. Quickly, completely, irreversibly. And if I'm honest now, fully honest, without hiding behind analysis anymore, I don't want to protect myself from this connection anymore. I want to build with it. I want to see what happens when two people stop treating depth like danger and start treating it like home. Because for the first time in my life, home doesn't feel like a place. It feels like your understanding of me.